A good answer. Answer was because we live in Hawaii. Anyone else have an answer for me?
It rains every night in my house.
Where do you live?
Kauai.
Fine, yeah. Yeah, that's another reason. Anyone else have an answer?
For planting, for plants.
For planting, okay. Yeah, and a simple answer is because you're dealing with plants, right? Plants always are growing unless they're dying. But most of you are trying not to kill your yards or landscapes, but otherwise they're always growing, so you got to take care of them. You know, there's an old saying that you're born and you die. In between, there's maintenance. Right? So, always got to take care of yourself and take care of your yards. So, what can we do to make it easier to take care of our yards? Now, simply what I'll be talking about this evening is just how to do that. One is using less plants, right? If you have less plants, then you have less to take care of. Two is using the right plants, right? And, you know, there's no magic formula for what the right plants are, but it's kind of depends on where you live exactly, and you know how much rainfall you get, how much sunlight you get, etc. We'll get into more of that later. And the third thing is to organize your yard properly. So we will start with the first one: use less plants. Okay, so we'll just talk about some alternatives to plants. You know, you don't have to fill your yard up with plants, and in essence, you don't even have to have a lawn. You can still have a nice landscape in your yard. So we'll talk about some things such as, you know, you can use mulch as a ground cover. So, you know, just your everyday ground up green waste mulch. You know, a lot of on the mainland, you know, I grew up in the Midwest and started doing landscaping there. People use mulch everywhere, you know, as a ground cover. But here, for some reason, a lot of people don't. Maybe because there's so much flowering plants and they're year-round and everything. They look great, but when you cover your yard with ground covers and flowering plants, well, that's a lot to take care of. One of the downsides with using mulch like this is that you kind of have to replenish it every year because it does break down into the soil, which is also good for your soil, but you know, probably once a year, twice a year, you got to add some more. But it can look nice, and it will help keep your maintenance down. Another idea that I like to use a lot is using inorganic ground covers. Okay? So those are rocks, right? You don't have to take care of rocks, and you don't have to water rocks. You don't really have to do anything with rocks. They take care of themselves. So that's a great alternative to simplify your landscaping, and you can still have a great looking yard. And really, the rocks kind of show off the plant material better because they make a contrast to the colors, right? So, for example, everybody knows in Hawaii, black cinders or red cinders, well, they make a great contrast against a green plant, you know? So if you have a garden bed with a bunch of black cinders, you can sort of picture that your plants are really going to pop out. So that's, to me, that's a really nice way to go. There's also a lot of other things.
Yeah, there's the gravel or pea gravel is one alternative. There's river rock, you know, stone. There's this type of stone, or there's the decorative stones that, you know, these come imported from the Philippines. They're all different colors and shapes.
Yeah, polished ones, you know, not polished ones, all kinds of different colors. They're a little more expensive, of course.
But these are good for accent areas. You know, they're not showy. We put a weed barrier mat underneath, you know, these ground covers, and that prevents the weeds from coming up through them. So then you don't have to worry about the weeds coming up, and the water can still percolate through, and you know, you get good drainage, and just makes it a real low maintenance landscape. And you can plant into it too, also. So.
Yeah. There's crushed coral. You know, sometimes this is hard to find. Sometimes it's not. I think right nowadays it's kind of hard to find.
Right?
And another one you don't see used very often is crushed glass. So this is stuff, you know, Garden Isle Disposal actually makes, and you can buy it in bulk, you know, and it's fairly inexpensive, and it's just, you know, crushed up glass of different colors. I don't know if you guys want to pass it around, you can kind of see. But it's something that you don't necessarily use very often, but could be used in the same way as gravel or any of these other things.
And another one, just a mulch with coconut fiber, husk for coconuts that have been ground up. It's especially good if you want to do orchids or anthuriums. You know, they love this type of material.
Okay, we'll talk about a couple other things. You know, you can use inorganic materials as accents too. You don't just have to use accent plants, you can use accent rocks, or, you know, a statue, or a little tiki, or like a Japanese lantern, you know, benches, etc. You know, these things you can work into your landscape instead of filling your yard up with plants that you have to take care of. Well, use some other pieces to fit in your landscape that can look beautiful, but you don't have to weed and water and fertilize and worry about. Okay, later on we'll talk a little bit more about, you know, properly organizing your yard, as I said. And one of those things is using borders or edging. You know, if you're going to have grass and you're going to have planting areas, you know, we recommend you put an edging between them, you know, because we live in Hawaii, we get a lot of rainfall, things grow really fast. Well, you don't have an edging there, well, that grass is going to keep creeping into your ground covers, and your ground covers are going to keep creeping into your grass, and sort of constant battle. And, you know, if you want to like keep your landscaping looking clean and nice, having an edge there, you know, is going to make your maintenance that much easier. So there's a lot of different edgings available these days. You know, there's
poly edging, which is very common. You know, there's different grades. This is more like a heavy-duty commercial grade of header that, you know, lasts a long time, can take a lot of beating from mowers hitting it, banging it. And then there's the little more pricey, but definitely real nice, is aluminum edging. You can get it anodized in, you know, different colors, black, green, brown. There's even, you can use river rock as a border, use rocks for your border. You can use lava rock, you can use, you know, different size rock, you know, to stagger, and that looks real nice, makes a real nice impact.
There's also some new materials that are like, this one I think is just a plastic, but it sort of looks like wood. You know, it's kind of made as like a 1x6 piece of lumber, but it's out of plastic, so it's not going to rot in the ground. And these are kind of nice because when they're in, you know, big pieces, they bend a little bit and everything, so you can still have the curves. They'll last essentially forever. So these are kind of cool, you know. Gives a little bit of different effect than the, you know, the traditional plastic edging that you see.
Roughly what the cost to put on that is there?
Material cost for that is, that one's about what?
About 50, maybe.
Probably that one's around about a couple dollars a foot, I think, for that linear foot.
If you get the composite wood, like the Trex lumber, you know, here on Kauai, stuff's really expensive. I think this is called Bend-A-Board. And it's made more like by a landscape edging company, so it's a little cheaper than like the Trex composite lumber. But if you can find that composite lumber cheaper, I think on Oahu, like Lowe's or the Home Depot on Oahu might sell it a little less expensive than on Kauai.
But it's that, you know, like the composite, you know, lumber or this material, you know, it's virtually, you know, indestructible. Termites won't bother it. It'll be there for a long time. So definitely won't, you know, cause any maintenance headaches long term.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to some other stuff you can do in your yard. You know, hardscapes, paths, patios, and planters. Okay, so we wanted to talk about accessibility in your garden too. Is, you know, not only, you know, different materials you can use, but making pathways so you can get around. So some things you need to consider first before deciding what you want to do is, you know, what level of accessibility do you need? You know, if you're planning for having wheelchair access, then that's going to kind of limit the materials that you can use. You know, you might not want a gravel path, or, you know, you might not want one that has a little more uneven of a surface or stepping stones or something like that. You know, you'd be better off with probably just concrete. But other than that, your considerations are probably budget. You know, concrete is a little bit expensive, but you can sort of go higher end than concrete. If you want a real nice pathway, you could do like quartzite finishes. There's a piece of it there.
This is this type of material here. You get a different colors and so forth, but makes a real nice decking material. You see this a lot of in the resorts, with pool deck areas and walkways. Real durable material and real low maintenance.
Of course, there's also the brick pavers, which is, you know, kind of an East Coast style thing, but there's a lot of different patterns you can make with them and everything, but they come out looking really beautiful. Those, of course, are a little more pricey because it's real labor intensive to install them. There's a lot of prep work involved, but, you know, they come out nice. It's not necessarily real popular out here, but it's certainly an option. There's also like cut lava rock,
Which is this right here, which is something that's been around not the last couple of years. It's fairly new to the market of Hawaii. It's brought in from, I think, China. They cut it over there, and it's imported in, but it makes a real nice looking walkway. You can use it for stepping stones or decking like quartzite, and you can grout in between and make a nice solid patio or walkways with it.
Yeah, in your little handout here, there's a couple pictures down at the bottom where there's, you know, one of them is pathway using this same material. Another is a deck that's going in, made out of that cut lava rock. Comes out looking really, really nice. This, of course, well, it's in progress, but you get the idea. You know, as I mentioned, sort of that you can, all of these inorganic ground cover materials you can also use as pathways. You know, you can make a gravel pathway, you can make a coral pathway, or even pathway in cinders. We seem to have a little bit more success if you, again, put a border on it and, you know, put the ground cloth underneath it, and then, you know, the gravel doesn't really move that much. If you don't put a border, then it starts spreading out into your grass or your ground covers or whatever it is, and then your gravel seems to disappear and you get the weeds coming up, and sort of you kind of do the work properly and you'll have a nice pathway even by using gravel. And the edging kind of makes it look a little bit cleaner and nicer too, even if it's just a gravel path, but it can look really nice.
No chicken scum. True.
Can't get away from that. But actually there is one solution we have kind of found recently is there's this product called Gravel Lock, and it's an epoxy that kind of binds all the gravel together, but it's still porous. So
water flows through it. You know, it's a polymer product that's water activated. You basically pour it on just to sprinkle it onto your gravel pathway, and it locks it together and makes a real, like a solid surface. So it's like a real great non-skid pathway, and it drains, water percolates right through it, and it really holds up well. So far we've used it. It's really durable and real low maintenance. It is a little bit costly for the polymer, but if you've got it, an area where it's on a slope, a pathway, and the gravel, might move on you or shift, or you're worried about, the thing sliding out on you, if you put that polymer, it locks it together, and it's, it's not gonna, it binds it together, won't move or shift. Even heavy rains, we've, had a couple jobs that are on steep slope areas, and really holds up well.
Do you still need ground cloth under that though?
You don't have to. You're supposed to, but that way you keep like the nut grass and the weeds that come in up through it. So it's better if you do it.
I think the manufacturer recommends that you do it, but probably not 100% necessary. And the ground cloth is inexpensive enough that it's sort of worthwhile to go ahead and put it down. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about quickly is planters. They're another way to put some interest into your landscaping, while not necessarily adding a lot of plant material. You can build planters out of, you've seen people with the nice lava rock planter boxes and everything, but you can do them out of CMU, or you can cast concrete into any shapes you want. Even using ceramic planter pots can add nice accents in your yard. Another popular thing these days is backyard gardening, so raised planter beds. A nice thing you can do with those is building those out of the composite lumber, because that's not going to rot, and then you can kind of custom build them to the size and shape you want. I think it seems to me that it makes it a little bit easier if they're like 4 feet wide, because then you can kind of get to them from one side and you get to them from the other side, and then you don't have to kind of climb into the planter to take care of your gardening. And making raised planter beds, of course, means you don't have to bend down as far to do your gardening either. And
Maybe they have hunter.
also, one of my colleagues was telling me that someone had the idea to make those raised planter beds and put a bench around the perimeter of them. So instead, basically they have a lip coming out, so you could even sit down and do your gardening, which is a great idea. It takes a little bit more material, a little bit more room, but then you'll be able to take care of your garden for a long time if you're not standing up and bending over.
And if you've got bad knees or a bad back, it just makes it easier. You can still garden. It doesn't stop you from, having a home garden and growing your own vegetables and so forth. Just simple, makes your life much easier.
Okay. Any questions so far?
What's CMU?
Concrete masonry unit.
Concrete blocks.
Yeah. Sorry about that. All right, moving on. Once in a while, you get somebody who recognizes the maintenance aspects of there.
Okay.
Of taking care of a yard, and they come in and they say, I want you to design me a backyard with no grass. I want lots of rocks. I don't want to have to take care of this thing at all. To me as a designer, that's a really fun challenge. So, and we've had a number of them over the years, and it's really enjoying it. It's cool to see them grow over time and see that they work. That you end up having like a really cool yard and very little to take care of it. So, we sort of put together this mock-up backyard with kind of a low maintenance thing. It's got this pathway that sort of winds through the yard, giving you access to the different parts of the garden. So, you've got an herb garden in one part of it, a vegetable garden in another, some cut flowers, some fruit trees, and you can sort of design this pathway so you can get around to every little nook and cranny of your garden and sort of make the most out of it. And then using river rock as ground cover. In other parts, you contrast that by using some black cinders. Under the fruit trees, I put in, just using some mulch as a ground cover. So that's going to keep the weeds down. But then, when your fruit is falling or whatever, you can still walk in on the mulch and pick up stuff and kind of keep it clean real easily. And you're not kicking around a bunch of rocks and the chickens aren't scratching around under there and all that stuff. So there's a lot you can do with low maintenance landscaping. It doesn't have to be a real boring thing. It can be a really interesting way to design your yard. All right, now we're going to move into the next part, which is using the right plants. So, factors that are going to determine what the right plant materials are is, well, first of all, your microclimate. Where do you live? Do you live in Kekaha? Do you live in Kauai? Do you live on the North Shore? Do you live up in the mountains, or do you live right on the beach? All those are going to make a big difference about what plant materials are going to like living where you live. If you plant something that's not going to be happy there, no matter how much you baby it, it's not going to look good. So, plant the right plant there, then it might look great and you don't have to do anything. So that's a very important thing to consider. Another factor is considering the long-term aspects of the plant material. If you plant a royal palm or line your driveway with royal palms, they might look great for 5 years, and then after that they are 80 feet tall and dropping fronds and seeds and all kinds of stuff all over your yard and driveway for the next 50 years, driving you crazy. They're too big to even enjoy. So, it's something important to think about before you plant. How tall is this plant going to get? How big is it going to get? How wide and everything. So, another thing to consider is, what is your level of dedication? Are you going to want to spend 40 hours a week in your garden taking care of it? Probably not. But something to consider. If you don't want to spend any time in there, then that's what you need to know from the beginning. Then we say, okay, plant some manila palms and put a bunch of gravel down. And you don't have to worry about it. You also need to think about water. How much rainfall do you get at your house? If you don't get much, maybe you want to think about putting in an irrigation system. Or do you have the time to hand water stuff? Or if you're a part-time resident, you're gone for half the year, who's going to be taking care of your yard while you're gone? So those are always important things to sort of make notes of before you decide what kind of plants you want to plant and how you want to design your yard. And of course, more elements in your yard is going to probably mean more maintenance. So the more simple it is, the easier it's going to be. It's sort of general logic that fits into landscaping as well. If you do have an irrigation system, you have to maintain your irrigation system too. If you put a water feature in, you got to maintain your water feature. If you put 5,000 plants in, you're going to have to maintain 5,000 plants. So that's something to think about too. And I have in here, if you're not picky, then you have a great opportunity to have a very low maintenance yard. Because, a lot of people will come in and say, I really like bougainvillea. I want a lot of bougainvillea in my yard. Well, bougainvillea grows to be 20 feet tall, has thorns. You have to trim it back at least once a month. And yeah, it looks nice, but it's a lot of work. And because it's thorny, it's a lot of hassle too. So sometimes you have to say, well, maybe I don't want bougainvillea because that's going to be kind of a pain. And then you pick some plant that's not going to be a pain. It might not be the prettiest one, but make your life a little easier, right?
The other thing too is where you plant the plant, like bougainvillea, that type of plant likes full sun. If you put it into a shady area, it's never going to flower. You're not going to be happy because it won't bloom, and you won't have the color that you're expecting to have. So that's all things you got to take into consideration too, is where you place plant material in your yard. Whether it's a sunny area, it's a shady area. Again, what I mentioned, climate. Are you in dry climate? Are you in wet area? Plumeria trees, they like it hot, dry. Plumerias would do great. Put plumeria trees in an area that's Wailu homesteads or up Kauai. They don't do as well. They'll grow, but they don't do as well because of more cover and it's not as hot and not as dry. They like, when you see that same plumeria tree down in Kingahar, Waimea, it's spectacular. But it's one of those you have to consider. How bad do you grew up in Kauai? How bad do you want a plumeria tree? It'll look okay, but it's never going to look like you see it down in the west side of the island where it's hot and dry. So there's things you have to take into consideration.
All right. If somebody comes into our office and says, I want low maintenance, we usually try to stick with these bulletproof plants, what we call them, right? So real tough. A lot of them can handle a lot of different conditions and situations. So on this paper, I don't have a lot of time to get into all the different varieties, but, I sort of listed a number of them in different categories: native plants, ground cover, shrubs, trees, etc. But, what Jerry's talking about sort of applies to all these plants too. That, take some of the native plants, for example, like Pohinahina, real nice ground cover, and it's real tough, but it likes well-drained soil. It's a beach plant. You can plant it in a lot of different areas on the island, but you got to have well-drained soil, or it's not going to be bulletproof. Or bromeliads are another example just like that, where they'll rot out real fast if it's sitting in water or if it's too wet. But if you have a nice, well-drained soil mix, then bromeliads, you never have to touch them. They look great all the time. So even though, this says bulletproof plants, it doesn't mean you can plant all of these anywhere on the island and never have to lift a finger. So you still have to do your research. And I guess one note on bamboo, I can't remember if I put it in there. Bamboos are a great low maintenance plant, but you got to have space for them, and you have to make sure you get a clumping variety. Because some varieties send out the runners, and then you're doomed. Yeah. Exactly. So, it's a low maintenance plant, but it really only works in certain situations. And palms are similar too, because palms in general can be real tough, but they have to be where they like to grow. You know, some palms are understory palms and like a lot of shade. If you stick them out in the sun, they're probably going to die. But if you put them where they like to be, then you know they're real tough and they can handle it. I listed a few even garden and veggie plants and herbs that, you know, these are stuff that are in my garden because I don't really have to do anything. Or, you know, when I forget to water my garden for months on end and I go back and, well, the rosemary's still there and the basil's still there and the oregano's still there, so they must be pretty tough. Those are the kind of plants I like. You know. Put it in the right place, then you're probably not going to have a lot of trouble with it. That's the goal, right?
And one I see a lot of, it's commonly people, house plants, is like a ficus plant. It's real nice as a house plant, but then it starts to get big and breaking up the pot. Well, maybe I'll just go stick it out in the yard. Bad mistake. Once you put it in the ground, if you got a small yard, oh boy, you're in trouble. You got 40 acres, put in the back 40, you're no problem. But they get huge. You know, it's the things you have to consider before you just put plant in the ground. Is how, you know, like Greg said, is that, you know, it's real important to look at how big that tree eventually will get. And that's, you know, I've seen that a lot of times where people, oh, this tree's so beautiful, they stick it in and, you know, near their house, and you know, 5 years later, the thing is starting to lift up the roof of their house. It's like, oh my goodness, what did I do? So that's real important to, you know, do a little research.
Yep, you can always come into K&L.
And we can give you pointers, yeah, because what does well, and, you know, give you input on, you know, on your yard, what, you know, what'll work well.
And if you did plant that ficus tree 5 feet away from your house, and we can come in and take it out for you too. But better to come in and get a little bit of free information by asking us a question than to come in and say, well, I need to spend $10,000 to remove this tree from my yard.
About that bit. That's it. 4 years later, I took it out and I chainsaw with a 30-inch bar.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of climbing too.
Yeah.
All right. Moving along here, so go to the last part of this, and that's properly organizing your yard. So the first point here is let's protect our plants. Buy a nice little citrus tree, and then you have somebody that's coming in and mowing and weed whacking your yard, and then it turns out they're, you know, girdling your tree because they're hitting it with their weed whacker on the bottom. And that's going to kill your plants. So how can we avoid some of that? There's, you know, a couple techniques that you can do. You know, one thing is you recommend putting a ring of mulch around the bottom of your tree, and that keeps the grass away from the trunk, you know, so if you're mowing the yard, you kind of staying far away from it. Of course, you still have the issues with the chickens, and they get in there and scratch up all the mulch and spread it all over the place. Another thing we do, there's a little picture of it on the back page, putting like a little corrugated drain pipe at the bottom of the tree trunk. It's probably really hard to see. these tiny little pictures. Right there, real small. You know, you cut a little 6-inch piece of drain pipe or what it could be anything and put it around the trunk of the tree, and so even if they get a little too close with their weed whacker, you know, that's going to at least protect it and you're hitting that drain pipe before you're hitting the tree trunk. Another thing we always recommend is putting a gravel maintenance strip sort of surrounding your house, you know, and then that's going to keep your plants 18 inches or 24 inches, or, you know, some people want to do 36 inches and you kind of have a nice pathway. Not only keeps your plants right up against your house, but actually it gives you some access to maintain these plants, you know.
And your house, so if you got to repaint or wash your windows, you can get there easy without having to cut the plants out of the way and stomp on them. And it also helps to keep termites out of your house. It gives you that barrier protection of, you know, having good plants next to the house, and more potential you got for termites, you know, getting into the plants and getting into your house. So it makes it much easier for inspectors to come out when they do termite inspections to see if there is termites. They can do, you know, it makes it real easy for them to see if you have any problems.
And the next point we sort of already touched on is just spending the time to research and design your yard. You know, even if it sets you back a year, it's going to be well worth the time and effort to do the research up front instead of finding out later that you made a bad mistake, you know. Another thing recommending is, you know, preparing your soil and planting beds. If you have some questionable soil, you might want to get a soil test done. They're not really all that expensive to have done, and they'll tell you what's in your soil and what your soil is missing and what they recommend to make your soil better. So I mean, it's, you know,
it's money well spent, because that way you're not putting something in your yard that doesn't need. You're giving your yard what you need for your plants, you know, specifically for your area, not just a general rule of thumb. So that way you'll have as healthy a plants as you could, you know, have in the long term. Build up your soil and get it to where you want it to be, so you have a nice garden year round.
And another thing that I recommend, and not only because it's sort of the way I do things, but if you're going to be doing a lot of the landscaping or maintenance yourself, then I always think it's a good idea to do your project in phases. You know, because you do the first phase, you know, you're not going to be overwhelmed with maintenance. You can kind of get a feel for what it's going to take care of this stuff. You're going to get a feel for what works in your yard and what doesn't work. And then, you know, you didn't just spend a lot of money and plant out your entire yard, and then you find out, well, there's some bug or pest problem that's going to kill off half the plants, or that you don't have the time to maintain it properly. You sort of do a little piece of it, and then you see, okay, well, I can handle more of this, or if this doesn't work, maybe the next phase I'll try something a little bit different. You know, it also helps with, you know, the money part of it too is, you know, you do a little bit of time, then it's not so much money all at once. Sort of my 2 cents. Or maybe 3. So I suppose we've got about 10 minutes for questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Yeah. It takes a while, you know, 25, 30 years. But when they get to a point, they max out about, 30 feet maybe. But that's about as big as they've seen it.
I've never seen the ground glass before. You focus a lot on research?
Yeah, we have some in stock at our place.
And it's not really something?
No. Yeah. And it's a good alternative, and it's a way to use, it's a recycled product. And,
Locally made. locally consumed beer bottles went into every bit of it.
Is it sold by the pound or by yard or how do you
By the cubic yard.
cubic yard?
Yeah.
And about what is it?
I think it would probably be around $30 a cubic yard. So relatively inexpensive for that volume.
How thick do you usually want to put several inches?
I would recommend probably 3 to 4 inches. And that way it's thick enough that, keep weeds from coming through, and you don't have to go any thicker than that. And that way if chickens do get in and scratch around, they won't get all the way to the bottom of the dirt.
And kind of like these, the fancier river rock, you can buy fancy recycled glass too. There's some companies on the mainland that sell it in different colors, like so you can get a bag of all blue glass or all green glass, and they have 50 different colors, but they sell it in these 50-pound bags, and it's fairly pricey, especially when you got to ship it all the way to Kauai too, and everything like that. So on Kauai locally, it's just sort of this mixed bag that's available. Of course, you could collect your own bottles and break them yourself, which is something I'm doing. So can't be that crazy, right?
I don't know.
Think long term. Yeah.
One thing I personally tried here on Kauai when I had a vegetable garden and I had trouble with the chickens. I found some old chicken wire. Put my mulch down, I put the chicken wire on top of it, cut it around the plants. Chickens don't like that. I mean, it doesn't look quite as nice, but it does cut down on the
Keep
chickens.
digging it out.
Digging it out. And then just stake it down with those yard stakes.
Right.
Staples.
Not a bad idea. You can peel it off and put some more on later.
Exactly. Or you can really fool the chickens and throw some on top of it and start digging.
Yeah.
There you go.
Any other questions?
You put the soil sampling?
We can take your samples, but we send them off to a lab.
Yeah, there's two people the labs you can, if you want to do it yourself, you can either take it to the University Extension Service in the State Building, second floor, or Brewer Environmental, BEI in the Kauai Industrial Park. They'll also do it, and they're probably a little faster than the university and give recommendations. It might be a little bit more money, but it depends how fast you don't want to get it turned around. If you want it quicker, probably go to BEI. If you're not so concerned time-wise, might be a little bit cheaper with the university. But they'll both give you recommendations. You just have to make sure you ask for that when you take the sample in, that you want recommendations of what to put into your soil, what they recommend. And you want to tell them what you're going to be planting too. If you're going to be doing lawn or if it's going to be ground covers, they like to know that so that they can fine-tune the recommendations for amendments for your soil.
The university has to do that off island?
Yeah, they ship it to Oahu, and same thing with BEI. They gather it up, and I think on Wednesday, both of them, they package up, box it up, and ship it to Oahu for testing over there in the labs over there.
What's the average regular, maybe half-acre lot average cost of having your property designed for a garden? Is there an
Not necessarily. It's just,
Depends on if you want a simple yard, I don't know.
for design work, you saying, or
For design work, design.
I mean, something simple could be $500, somewhere around there.
If you want a lot of detail, then it could get up, $1,500, depending how detail you want it to be, and how nice, long term. If you want a master plan, for long term, take a little more thought into it, a little more time. Any other questions? Okay, well, appreciate you everybody for coming. Thank you.
If anybody wants a card,
Oh, I know where you're at.